Taking you live now to Canberra, where Treasurer Scott Morrison is speaking.
To manage the transition in our economy, which the national accounts demonstrated was happening. 3% through the year growth yesterday, stronger than the G7, stronger than the OECD, putting us up there in the likes of South Korea and others who are growing at the same rate. Now that transition has to be well managed, and you don't manage it well by rushing out there with the sort of ill-considered policies which the Labor Party has done.
Treasurer, are you now less inclined to touch negative gearing than you were, say, a week ago?
Well, in September last year, the Prime Minister put negative gearing back on the table. And it has been the job of the process, which as Treasurer I've been looking through, to examine all of these options. Examination of options doesn't suggest enthusiasm for options or any lack of enthusiasm for options either. It's the job to work through the details of this analysis. People know that I have always been a strong advocate for those engaged in negative gearing. When I was Social Services Minister, I put out one of the strongest defences of negative gearing at the time when it was under attack. You know, we'll look through these issues, we'll look at the distribution of how the negative gearing practice is being employed out there, but as I said yesterday, and as Peter Costello said last night, it's a general taxation principle about being able to offset the costs of incurring an income with the measures that you have to be able to offset it against your income. So that's an established principle. Where we finally arrive on that will be based on the process we've been engaged in, but what we know is you've got to look at the impact, and I think we're seeing very clearly the impacts of the way Labor is fiddling around with this policy.
So can you just clarify, changes to negative gearing are still on the table? There are reports today
well, the government is just going to continue working through our process. I mean, that's the disciplined, mature way we've been going about considering these questions. You don't go out there and just rule something out on the basis of politics. What you do is you do the work, and that's what we have been doing. Now, I think we've been very clear in our statements about the great risks to the way Labor's policy would impact on the economy. As I said, it's going to hit your home, it's going to hit the economy, and it's going to hit rents. That's what the modelling, independent of the government and independent of the Labor Party, has shown.
But it's now quite hard for the government, though, to come up with a negative gearing policy because you have been slamming Labor's policy for so long. Is it really difficult to now, you know, come up with one of your own? Well,
we've been examining the area, and we're very aware of the great risks, and always have been throughout this process. Where others may be suggesting changes should be made is a matter for them. We've looked at some options, but you're right to say that the dangers of making changes in this area are very real. They're very real, and we've always been aware of that. That's why we haven't sort of rushed out there like the Labor Party has. We'll continue our process and we'll conclude that, and then we'll move on from there. But what this Bish-Shrapnel report says, and Bish-Shrapnel have been around property economics for a very, very long time.
Last one, guys. I'm not trying to ask you to rule anything in or out, but is it more appealing now to touch negative gearing than it was a week ago, or is it less appealing?
Well, you are actually doing exactly that. I think I've given you a very clear answer on this, and that is the government has been going through a process to examine the options that were put on the table by the Prime Minister in September of last year. And when we're in a position to make announcements on what that analysis has produced, then we will do so. As we did on the GST, there is a budget in May. That's when any final announcements around tax policy, that's the back-end marker for those to be out there in the public domain, and there's nothing unusual about that. But I think it's very important that in this context of where the Australian economy is transitioning positively, this is the most important economic challenge the country faces. How we continue to successfully manage the positive transition in our economy, and the risks of that are posed against that, the risks against the transitioning economy being successful, is the sort of ill-considered, foolhardy, negative gearing tax proposals that have come from the Labor Party.
Just lastly, whoever leaks the defence white paper...
So any other questions on the bill?
Yeah. Do you believe Tony Abbott when he says he didn't leak defence white paper documents?
I take Tony Abbott at his word on that, and I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister has taken the right decision in the interests of national security, and this is what has been driving the Prime Minister. you've got to do the right thing on national security, and where there are breaches such as that, then they need to be investigated without fear or favour. And it's important for the integrity of how national security matters are handled that that process is undertaken. And the Prime Minister has moved very swiftly to do that, and I think that should give Australians a lot of confidence about where he sees the integrity of national security in the way he seeks to run his government. I mean, playing politics with national security, I think, is a very, very dangerous and disappointing thing to have occurred. But it's I think, very reassuring that the Prime Minister has risen above, as he does, on these things and is ensuring the integrity of the process. The integrity of the process is paramount, whether it's on national security or whether it's considering issues in relation to tax. That's the sort of mature government that Australians expect, and I believe they're getting. Thank you.
Should the League face